Hey, welcome to the PublishPress podcast. I'm Steve Burge from PublishPress.
And I'm Dan Knauss from Multidots.
And in this episode, we're talking with Chris Hardie, who was a WordPress developer and left that life a couple of years ago to take over a newspaper in Indiana. The newspaper is called the Western Wayne News, and he's been applying some of his WordPress development skills to running a newspaper.
I followed Chris in his journey up to this point, and then he's gotten quite quiet in the last 2 years. So I knew he must be busy doing a lot of cool things. And so we got to find out what that was. Some of the technical side, the human side, all the parts of running a business quite successfully too, it sounds like.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Let's jump in and hear from Chris. Hey, Chris, welcome to the PublishPress podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, Chris, I've been following your story for several years now since you took the leap from being a WordPress developer to a newspaper person. I'm not quite sure what the newspaper owner or the correct title for you is.
Sure.
Hey, how are things going a couple of years into this journey?
Yeah, it's going really well. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot. It's really hard. It's probably the hardest work I've ever done, hardest job I've ever had. And I'm just thrilled to be doing it. But it's a challenge.
Can you introduce the newspaper?
Sure.
Where is it? What do you cover?
Yeah. So I'm the publisher and owner of a hyperlocal community newspaper called the Western Wayne News. And we appear in print once per week, and we publish online throughout the week. And we cover Wayne County, Indiana. So we're here in the Midwestern United States, and the county, is somewhere in the 60, 70,000 people range, and pretty rural, but with a couple of the city of Richmond where I live. And I'm the third owner. The paper was started in the early 90s by a woman named Janice, who kind of noticed the lack of information available about the western part of the county. It's kind of a newsletter style at that point, very informal and, community driven. And then about 7 years ago, her daughter, Brenda, and Brenda's husband, Jim, took over. And they kind of expanded and professionalized it a bit, started looking more like a traditional newspaper, hired some folks to do, with a journalism background to do reporting that way. So, and then I took over 2 years ago, and I can tell you that story too, but it's,
how did you get to that point? How did you decide, okay, I need to take a fork from being a WordPress developer?
Right.
And how did you decide on this new direction?
Well, yeah. So, I grew up with, a transition happening in the world of journalism and newspapers, right? I was a newspaper carrier as a kid, and I worked on school newspapers in high school and college. I was a blogger from the beginning of blogging, and loved the immediacy of that, and thought to myself probably at the time, like, okay, the newspaper world is dead. Blogging is the future, and kind of became a local media critic, if you will. For a while, I was very closely watching how the community got its information and the role that the local daily Gannett paper had in that. And I guess through that critic role, I really came to appreciate the depth and fact checking and context building that a newspaper can do that some blogging wasn't doing. And so I was like, okay, maybe there is a place for journalism and reporting in this mix. And long story short, I continued to get involved in politics and community improvement and not-for-profits. Just my concern and my thinking about where people got their information just kept growing. So even as I was building my career as a software developer and WordPress developer and a small business owner, I was thinking about that question, where do people get their info, and how do they make decisions, and how do they decide what's important to them? It was on a sabbatical from my work at Automattic when I realized that I should probably pursue that a little bit more formally, because I was spending so much time thinking about it. And so I decided to go back to school for a master's degree in journalism. And that was, helpful, informative, wasn't quite clear where I was going with it. And then I was also doing some consulting for the previous owners of the Western Wayne News, the newspaper, mostly, on tech stack, but also strategy, digital strategy, kind of growing that part of the business. And that relationship, grew over time. And so at some point that they said, we're thinking of retiring. Would you like to talk about owning this paper? And, took a long time with that question and that process and thinking that through with my family, but eventually decided that was what I wanted to do. And so worked out an offer and a purchase agreement, and here I am.
So what did you buy? What did you acquire? Is there an office, a printing press? What comes when you buy a local county level newspaper?
Right. I mean, it may be a little bit similar to a SaaS business. I mean, you're mostly buying the production infrastructure and the customers, right? We don't have our own printing press. We've outsourced that. So it's the brand of the paper, it's the subscriber list, it's the archives, the history, and the community goodwill. And that's what I stepped into. We do have an office, but some people come for a tour thinking they're going to see a printing press or the inner workings of newspaper production. And really it's people sitting at desks looking at screens. So I guess I bought some computers and some screens too.
Yeah, so you're in Indiana.
That's right.
The actual printing is done with a company for a couple of hours away from you that's trucked in every morning?
That's right. When I started, the press was about 45 minutes away, and about a year and a half ago, we switched printers to one that's about 2.5 hours away. As you all know, I mean, I think the world of printing is shrinking as well as the world of newspapers, and so there's presses closing all the time, and that's something that keeps me awake at night a little bit. Is where will the newspaper be printed if something happens to our current printer? Fortunately, the one we have is great, and they're a family-owned business that they've made some long-term plans that we're really impressed with. So yeah, a truck shows up every Wednesday morning and it drops off the papers from them, and it arrives in our lives, and then it's our job to help get it out to the world.
How integral is the printed part of the newspaper in terms of the number of people kind of working on it, in terms of the revenue, in terms of how much of your day it takes up? What's the spread between the online version and the paper version?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had asked me when I was first thinking about buying the paper and then buying it, I would have said, the print version is a nice to have and might go away sooner rather than later. I've since realized how wrong I was about that. Okay. I mean, it's very integral to what we do. Part of it is, in a rural place where some people either don't have reliable internet access or they're choosing not to spend a lot of time with internet access as a way to get information. The paper showing up at their doorstep is a way that they're going to get news and information that they wouldn't otherwise get. It has a certain amount of credibility building for us, right? We've invested in that infrastructure and that cost of getting a printed product out the door, and that's different in some ways, for some people, not for everyone. And it tends to be a driver then for things that we're doing online or other projects. So I've kind of come around to the idea that we're gonna keep printing a paper for as long as we possibly can, because we're reaching people we wouldn't otherwise reach. And even for younger folks, I've heard them say that they enjoy and appreciate being able to sit down with the printed paper and like focus on it in a way, it's just a distraction-free way of taking in information and reading stories, and they appreciate the contrast to never-ending scrolling.
Do you charge for it? Do people pay to get it delivered? Okay.
Yeah, so we're a mix of advertising and subscription driven. Right now, it's about 43% subscriptions and retail sales, and then about 57% advertising. And so our base subscription rate is $55 for the year. We charge a little more if you get it mailed to you outside of the county or outside of the state, but it's very affordable. It works out to around $1 a week for what might be 28 or 32 pages of news articles and information and calendars and sports and all this stuff. So I think it's an incredible value myself. And
there's very little you can get for $1 a week now.
That's right. But we have some people who remember it when it was $18 a year, and they're like, 55, that's a lot. But other people are like, oh, you should raise your prices. That's crazy. It's so low. So yeah, so that's a factor too.
Right. Is there a digital only option, or do they get both? And the advertisers appreciate having both options, or was that a transition you had to go through?
Yeah. So when I took over, the digital presence was there, but it was kind of an afterthought. All of the time and energy was on, let's get the print edition out the door. And then if we can throw a couple of the articles on the website, that's great. And there wasn't really a paywall strategy or, much beyond that. And that's a part I worked on a lot. And so now, my goal is to get the digital experience to parity with print as much as that's possible. If you buy a digital subscription, which you can do annually for $50, so just a little bit a price below the print edition, or you can do a monthly option for $6 a month. That gets you kind of the PDF e-reader experience. You can kind of flip back and forth between pages there. It gets you unlimited access to articles that we're posting on the site, and then a few other things. People can still read articles. We have a leaky paywall, so metered paywall, some people call it. So, you can read a couple articles for free if you're completely logged out. If you create a free account, you get a few more every month. And that's been a really strong driver of subscriptions as well. There wasn't really a paywall strategy in place. And when we put that in place, we saw a big jump in paid subscriptions, which has been great.
Was that Newspack by chance you were using? It looked a little Newspacky.
No, yes, we use a Newspack theme. It's one of the Newspack child themes that then I've kind of turned into yet another child theme of that. We don't use the Newspack plugin, but we bring in some of the same functionality. The paywall itself is custom, but heavily inspired by the folks at Leaky Paywall. And I've just been a fan of some of their writing and publishing about paywall strategy, and just pieces gathered from my time in school and kind of all around. So and it's a WordPress plugin that I wrote and maintain, but it's pretty basic, but it does the job.
So you had a post up recently explaining that you built a newspaper management system, I think you called it, where basically you have a tech stack that goes all the way from creating the original PDF that gets sent to the printers, to putting that content online, to the subscription management, which I believe is WooCommerce. You basically renovated the entire tech stack that runs your newspaper since taking over?
Yeah, it's funny. When I first started consulting for the paper, I came into the office and I said, can you show me your subscriber database? And they walked me over to a card catalog and, pulled out the 3x5 cards with the handwritten notes about the subscriber history and each time they'd renewed. And it was delightful and amazing. But the software developer in me said, no. Like we can't.
There's an opportunity here.
Right.
Yeah.
So step one was just bringing the subscriber database into something that we could work with. And that ended up being a custom Laravel app, using the Filament administrative tools on the back end to kind of build admin panels and screens. And so I brought the subscriber database in, and then step two was, okay, now I need to be able to export that in a way that's useful to our printer. So, I was connecting it up to that process every week of sending the order off to the printer. And then it was, okay, right now we're sending out subscriber reminders for renewals by someone sitting down and, hand printing a bunch of mailing labels and postcards. And so I said, okay, well, is there a service out there that has an API where we could generate a postcard and send that off? And I found one and made my tool talk to that. So those were the beginnings, and it's basically I've just gone wild from there. Like how many processes, how many things that are taking up someone's manual time every week can I turn into if it makes sense, not unreasonably so, but can I turn into a tool? And I haven't let anybody go or fired anybody or said you're being replaced by software, but through natural, retirements and people leaving for health reasons and other things, we've lost some people in these couple of years. And I think I've been able to, I would say, cover about 2 full-time positions with this application in terms of the features that I've built. And for a small team, that's a big difference. It's meant that I've been able to, help us focus on some of the more creative stuff by letting software do some of the more tedious things.
It sounds like a gold mine for someone who's process orientated. There's so many things that had no process. And
right.
If your brain works that way, you can come into an old newspaper and create processes for days to get things done, to make things more efficient.
Right. And I mean, and there were processes before, but it was, information locked up in someone's head who, we had someone there who was there for 30 years and was just, masterful, expert level, working on the domain of, let's say, our legal advertising public notice publishing, right? And it's this really nuanced thing that involves state law and all these weird billing things and convention and communication and local governments. And, that was something that, she could do really well, but it was not something that would scale or be, replicable by somebody else. And so a lot of my focus, again, I think maybe to put it in SaaS terms, like there was product market fit and there was, clear idea validation, and I'm here to make it scale in terms of number of subscribers and what we're doing in the community. So I've enjoyed that process, and it's been fun to bring my software development background into the mix that way.
Nice.
Can you just describe Wayne County? It's from looking at on Google Maps before we talked, it seems like it's a fairly rural place, but also almost smack bang in between several big cities that are an hour away. What's Wayne County like? What's the audience that you're talking to through the newspaper?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's an interesting place. I find it interesting. It's a mix of rural agriculture, farming. There's several higher education institutions here, college, universities. There's a small but growing high tech scene. There's a healthcare industry. A long time ago, it was a place known for its kind of manufacturing capacity and entrepreneurship in that world. Obviously, that's changed a lot in the global economy. And I think we're still a place trying to find where we fit into that global economy. We don't have a strong identity where people say, oh, Wayne County, it's everyone knows it for X or Y or Z. We're still trying to figure that out. And we have some of the same struggles that a lot of similar communities do with substance abuse and poor health and literacy and housing and things like that. So it's a place that, might feel familiar to folks who have lived in the Midwestern US or maybe other parts of the world. But I think there's some things about it that make it special too. And, when I came here, I didn't intend to stay, but I've really made a life here and really appreciate what I have.
To what extent are you tackling those problems you describe? How much of the output that you have is kind of positive, building up the brand of the area, showcasing all the positive things that are going on, and how much is harder journalism, perhaps dealing with some of the problems of a fairly small rural county?
Yeah. It's interesting because there are people who think that newspapers should be that first thing, right? The booster of the community and tell the positive stories and that's it. And, if there's negative stuff, okay, once in a while, but people don't want to see that. And, I guess I still think that as a journalistic publication, we have a responsibility, even, when it's very local and it's sometimes about our neighbors and people we know, to bring accountability and transparency and context, even if that's hard stuff. I think we do a good job of telling the stories of good things that are happening or people who are tackling challenges, and we do a mix of hard news, of features, of profiles, of sports. Sports is amazing. It's another one of those things that I don't think I fully understood the role of the sports pages when I was coming in, and now I understand how much, parents and families and grandparents and teams, just the sense of accomplishment and camaraderie that goes with that world, and seeing their name and their photo in the paper and what that means. It's amazing, and it's really heartwarming, and it's really cool. So we spend a lot of time on government meeting coverage. It's one of those things where one of my reporters, Mike, spent all day yesterday at county commissioners and county council meetings, throughout the whole day, because, he was the only reporter there and the only person who was going to be covering what they were doing at those meetings and kind of bringing context and detail. And there are times where I'm like, oh my goodness, we're spending so much time attending these meetings, school boards, government entities and commissions, and, think of all the stories we could be writing if we weren't doing that. But it is a really important way, I think, that we serve the community and bring accountability. And every once in a while, we land on a story that's, I think, really important to the community, good or bad or something else that we're able to get because we have those relationships and we're covering those things. So I think it's a good mix. I think there's always room for improvement, and it's something I always wish I had more time to fiddle with. But with a small team, pretty pretty limited in what we can try out there.
So what is the workflow like from the reporter at the meeting all the way to a printed and digitally published article?
Yeah, it's pretty streamlined. Our print production timelines still drive a lot of what we do, and that's one thing I'm hoping to keep gradually shifting. So, Mike, again, to use that example, covered yesterday's meetings, took a lot of notes, probably spent a lot of today writing up articles about those meetings, breaking them out into topic appropriate, segments, and then sends that into a story database where it's marked as ready for editing. Sometime in the next couple of days, myself and one other contractor we work with for editing is going to dive into that and get it ready for publishing. It will most likely wait until the print edition to actually be published. If it's particularly timely or juicy or interesting, we might try to publish it online before then, but usually the digital publishing is happening at the same time. Again, I'd like to keep experimenting with that a little bit so that, an article that is about a meeting that happened yesterday that's, coming out and getting in people's hands a week and a half later, I think there's room for improvement there. But right now we're kind of driven by that print process. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering the part of the process question that you're interested in, but that's the overview.
Yeah. I'm always interested in a little more on the technical side too, and where WordPress gets into the pipeline. And are you doing the editing, level inside WordPress or outside and then bringing it in?
Outside right now. We actually are using an Airtable setup that was in place when I bought the paper, and it was Airtable is really nice in that it seems really usable for largely non-technical folks, pretty intuitive, and also has lots of capabilities that then we can integrate it. So the team figured out okay, we can plan an issue using Airtable. That process was in place, and I haven't really touched it since then. I've added some fields and some integrations. So reporter will create a record in Airtable for the upcoming issue, dump the text in there when the article's ready, and then it's a status field that's marked as ready for editing. We have a bunch of Slack bots that, then come back to an editing channel that says, okay, there's 15 things that are ready for editing for this issue. And then we can kind of take that on. And then, as things are marked as ready for publishing, they can go into the layout process and get pulled into InDesign. Then also, built some tools that will take an article straight out of Airtable and draft a post in WordPress with all the, kind of meta fields filled in. So as we're prepping the print issue, I'm hitting a button that says bring all this into WordPress. And so then those drafts are ready for kind of final review and publishing as well.
Nice.
It feels clunky at times, but when I have seen other papers and other processes where it's a lot more copying and pasting, I feel good about minimal copying and pasting. Still, plenty of human oversight and involvement. But again, I think we're down to the part where the humans are doing some creative things instead of a lot of clicking and copying and pasting. So.
Right. Do you go to InDesign from WordPress or from Airtable? That's a interesting step of starting more digital and then going into print.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. And I became aware that, there's a bunch of enterprise level tools for integrating with Adobe products. I'm not enjoying Adobe products in general. I'll say, there's things that they make possible, but it's kind of a, use it because we need to. But I did figure out a way to have a script installed in everyone's Adobe InDesign installation that you can basically run to say, for the page that I have open right now, go ahead and pull in the stories from Airtable that are ready to place on this page. So basically the layout person can click that button and all of a sudden they have these blocks of stories they can move around on the Airtable page to place, and the headlines in the right spot with the right style applied and the cut lines and everything else. So, and that talks to my kind of central application, and that then goes out and talks to Airtable. So we could theoretically swap in another source if we needed to pretty easily. It's not a direct Airtable connection. Same thing for, built some other InDesign tools for generating the PDF edition of the paper that then gets uploaded to WordPress, doing things like that too. So there's software everywhere.
Nice.
But sometimes it feels like a big ball of duct tape and twine holding it all together.
There's a ton of APIs involved in almost every step.
Yeah. And I, I like that. But it means that I'm spending a lot of time. I don't know about a lot of time. It means that any given week, I may be jumping in and out of the role of IT and software development at times where I don't want to be. If an API goes down or a spec changes or, something about my test coverage didn't catch something that, when I added a feature. So it's a little bit fragile that way. It's one of the reasons I'm not, pitching this application I've built to other publications at this point, because it's pretty bespoke for us, but it's not totally falling apart. It's just a lot of complexity there that's interesting to maintain.
What does an average day look like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a core set of things that have to happen every week, right, to get the paper out the door, and that's pretty relentless. And no matter what, those things have to get done, and then everything else is, if I can fit in other things on top of that, that's a bonus. Any given week can be full of surprises. As I said, there can be breaking news, there can be production issues, there can be technology issues, there can be people issues. People get sick, people need time off, people have life things happen, and we're pretty understaffed, so we're constantly running around and stretched pretty thin. There are, for me, subscriber support requests that might need my input. Again, I've largely connected our WordPress WooCommerce subscription setup to my central management app, but sometimes there are edge cases there that need my involvement or just approval. Right now, I'm handling a lot of advertising inquiries and doing that because we don't have an ad sales rep. I'm helping prioritize our news coverage, figuring out what meetings we're going to go to, which ones we're going to have to skip or catch up on video later. I'm doing editing, I'm paying bills, running payroll, interacting with our contractors and vendors. And then, where I can, looking ahead to features and coverage and schedule changes and publishing challenges. Sometimes I'm doing page layout. Sometimes I'm doing ad design. I helped my daughter start a paper route so she could deliver just a handful of the papers that are being mailed to our neighborhood instead of going through the postal service, having her deliver those. So I've been accompanying her on that route just for fun. And then once in a while, I even get to write some articles and do some journalism.
I was about to say, It sounds as if you're doing everything apart from actually writing the stories.
Yeah, I would say at this point, I'm writing, maybe an article a month, sometimes less. And I'm certainly involved in a lot of our articles. I mean, my editing role and my publisher role means that I'm talking with my reporters about how we're going to approach a given story. What are the things that we should focus on? There are times where I'm writing articles, but my byline isn't on them because it's more of a staff report, press release, rewrite, or it's pulling together some data into, an article. So I'm doing a lot of writing and a lot of editing, a lot of reading, but my name isn't on a lot of the individual pieces. So it's a funny state.
Have you found any good partnerships or ways to collaborate with other people in the same business? It's there's so many small papers. There's so many on WordPress. I remember going way back, some of the first really cool plugins developed for going from digital to print, or for I think that was Banger Daily News.
Yeah.
Quite a while. Are there common code bases or any just ideas and things you swap around? What's the network like for peers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always want more, but I have found a lot of great resources. Locally, I mean, there's a state press association, and I've gone to some of their conferences. And so again, it's meeting other people who are doing the kinds of things I'm doing in Indiana. Sometimes, I find, they may be part of a larger corporation, and so they have their own tools, or they, have a different budget or a different approach than we do. But I've been able to make some connections and colleagues there. We're a part of the Lion group, local independent online news publishers. They had a great gathering recently in Chicago that I was able to go to, and basically spent a couple of days in small groups and workshops with other publishers and other reporters and writers who were struggling with a lot of the same questions that we are, and a lot of the same challenges. And that was heartening and amazing to connect to them. I've been to a couple other, conferences, events. It's something I try to do once or twice a year, just to be connecting to people outside of my local community, because I need that perspective. But I think where I have, maybe looked for things that I haven't found is just people hacking on news tools in general. I mean, there's a Slack called News Nerdery that I'm a part of, and it's technical people working on news related things, and that's been great. But a lot of it's like, getting ready for this election cycle, or doing this particular data journalism project. It's less ongoing things. But there's there's a CMS channel there where we talk about things you're doing with your CMS. There's the News Product Alliance. There's a group called Gather, and they have some WordPress specific things. So yeah, I've been able to find connections. They're scattered around, and it's there's so many people working on and thinking about this, and so you always wish for more kind of tightly integrated networking, communication, and but I've been able to find some of that for sure.
That's cool. I'm just looking up News Nerdery. It looks like I see Adam Schweigert and Daniel Bachhuber, and it's a bunch of WordPress people.
Yeah, I see Adam in pretty much every time I end up in a place, virtual or real. I see Adam there across the room, and he seems to be involved in so much of that. So that's been really fun.
That's cool. I'm working with a client now that's more of a unique but traditional and old news publisher at part of the company, and I'll have to get on this.
Yeah,
awesome.
Chris, I posted on Blue Sky that I was going to be talking to you today, and got a couple of questions from people, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One was from Joe LeBlanc. What has been the biggest challenge in going from WordPress development to journalism?
I mean, there's the obvious, with software, you can make a change, push it live, see the impact right away. With journalism, and especially print publishing, there's a longer timetable for things. I've been able to make improvements and changes. There's also a sense that you want to create some consistency and meet expectations and serve the needs of the community. And that's a much broader challenge, I think, than like, can I launch this feature that will do this one thing? I thought project management and client relationships in the software development and website development world were hard, and that the timelines and the pace and the deadlines were something that could bring stress if you allowed it. I didn't know what was waiting for me around the corner when it comes to newspaper publishing, and just the weight of the stories we're bringing to the community. Is it the right mix? Are they the right stories? Are we bringing the right voices? Are we catching the right news? Are there things happening that we're not aware of that we should be? And, I don't know, it's a different level of stress, or just worry, or wonder. And, you can have as much process as you want, or much good tooling as you want, but then news breaks out, and you have to jump into action to cover it. And that's a human level thing that has all the question marks and unknowns of human level activity. So I love that about it. And it's, it's been rewarding and it's been feeding me, but it's a very different world and experience from software.
Sounds like you're saying that software development is easier.
I would so.
Okay.
I mean, I never developed software for, medical uses or moon landings or things like that. So maybe there are people who would, have a much different experience, but I worked on some pretty high profile, high stakes WordPress projects in my time, and those all felt easier than what I'm doing now. So
this engages far more parts of your brain, probably.
I think so, in a wonderful way. Yeah.
Have you been doing anything different? This again is a question from Blue Sky. Can you think of anything where you've swum against the stream with what you're doing? Are you following a fairly sort of standard approach, or have you tried any big experiments with the newspaper?
I mean, I guess I have the benefit of not having been in the newspaper world for very long, and so I don't have a deep knowledge of convention, and I guess that may be serving me well in some ways. For example, I have some reporters who have come from the world of like Gannett newspapers, and they've told me stories of the relentless focus on clicks and views. For example, what's the headline or what's the story that's going to get this certain level of online engagement, and we don't really do that. Like we don't write stories for engagement. We write them for are they informational? Are they useful? Are they interesting? And overall, that's been my approach to the paper, is like, how can we create something that is useful to people, that engages them, that inspires them. And, that's what we're going to do. Like that's the thing that we're going to create. And if they find that useful, they're going to pay for it. And that's turned out to be true. So I feel grateful that I'm not spending time worrying, how are we going to respond to an advertiser's demand for a certain number of views on an ad. Like we're just not doing that. We've tried to be community driven in the sense that we had, when I took over the ownership of the paper, had some listening sessions. We'd set up meetings at local libraries and just invite people in to say, like, what do you think of the paper? What do you want to see? What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? And really incorporate that feedback into what we do. I've tried to make sure we confront ways in which we are not including some voices in the community. We're a pretty white staff. We're a pretty just demographically like not very diverse. And so thinking about like, how could we bring in other voices, both on our team as reporters or otherwise? And how can we make sure that we're reaching out to parts of the communities that we're, maybe wouldn't naturally be connected to? And I think the other thing is just, taking the long-term approach that like we're, trying to build something that's focused on my staff making better wages, trying to eventually get health insurance, trying to have some of the perks that I experienced in the tech world. And when it comes to like, hey, there's a professional development fund and like maybe we can send you to a conference now, or, send you, put you through a workshop or something that would be beneficial to you, and try to build the company in a way that is looking toward that long-term, attracting and retaining people, as opposed to what I have gathered is the standard for a lot of the news industry, which is put people through the grinder and extract as much value from them as possible before they burn out and move on. And I'm not saying that every newspaper does that or any particular company does that, but I think that is more common than I realized. So, yeah.
It sounds like you fully expect to be doing this in 10, 15 years' time.
Well, it depends because the version of it now really relies on a small team being stretched too thin, myself included. And, I have conversations with my wife and my family all the time about like, what is sustainable? And, if we can't find more people to help us, and if the people we have now eventually, decide they can't do it anymore, like we can't exist. So I can't, I can't automate journalism. There's no AI that's going to do the kind of reporting we're doing. And so it really does depend on the people. It depends on my family being very understanding about my schedule and work. But yeah, like I would like to set the paper up for long-term success. I would like to keep growing into new revenue streams, new parts of what we do, new ways of reaching people, and have a thing that exists for a long time. But my goodness, I can't do this particular version of it for 10 or 15 years because I just can't.
It's fair to say you're not sat there with your Google Analytics chart up on the board for everyone to see, chasing massive hits. You're not chasing clicks. You're operating at a pretty different pace with different goals.
Yeah, I think the advantage. We're lucky in that we're a hyper local publication in a place where there aren't a lot of other great options for staying informed. Culturally, as you all have seen, there's a shift away from people spending time going out looking for news or, journalistic resources to stay informed. And so we can only keep doing that as long as there are people willing to pay for it. I will say, I think our print audience certainly skews older, folks with disposable income who grew up in a time where there was a daily newspaper that they found useful. At some point, those folks won't be around anymore. And if younger generations are not filling in with that interest, then, we have to adapt to that. I don't know, how long we can survive that, but that's where I'm trying to try other things with podcasting, thinking about different kinds of community events for engagement and growing our audience too. So there's a lot to do. I think there's a lot to try. There's some amazing experimental, fun stuff happening in the world of local news. And so it's an amazing time to be in this world. But there's a lot at stake too.
Can you say more about audience engagement and how you've done that, and how you think that might change? I see you've got like comments disabled, but a high newsletter subscription. So do different things happen there? And there's you let people contribute potentially, citizen journalism.
Yeah. One thing I'd really like to do is pursue the documenters model that's come out of Chicago, and just the idea of training and educating folks locally on what it means to show up to a government or a school board meeting, be a source of, documenting what happens there, posting a summary and a transcript or whatever it is, in a way that's available to the public, and letting that be a kind of citizen journalism. It's not quite the same thing as writing an article about what happened at the meeting, but I think that's an amazing approach that holds a lot of promise for us. And there's a growing a kind of Indiana focused and rural focused version of that that's happening too. We certainly we have a feedback survey in every print edition. We solicit feedback through the email newsletters we send out. We have a retail storefront where we're talking to our subscribers and readers on a regular basis about what they think and what they like. So there's a lot of that as well. But yeah, like I have not yet cracked the nut of, when someone says I'm involved in the community, I care about what you're doing, I want to contribute. Maybe I have a blog, or I wrote for my school newspaper, but they don't have journalistic experience. They don't have, the connections or the training to then be thrown into the deep end of, covering a meeting or investigating something or whatever. So how do we bring them along? And I don't mean to sound condescending towards folks who don't have a journalism background, because I think there's still, a lot of ways we can engage, but I have to be careful not to dilute, the service that we're providing when it comes to being a journalistic publication as well. We have some community contributors, we have some columnists, we have some contractors who work with us, and so we've been able to do that, to some degree. But there's definitely more to do there that I think about a lot.
Final question about the newspaper. Feel free to evade this question as much as you want to. Okay. This question from Blue Sky again. Can you tell us a little bit about the finances? You mentioned a little bit about the revenue coming from subscriptions and from online subscriptions and advertising. How does it break down? Are you getting money from obituaries, from legal listings? What does the finances look like for a small newspaper?
Yeah, I'm actually happy to share about that. And one thing I've done that I guess is a little bit against the norm is I've been publishing transparency reports where I actually put our finances out there, our revenue and expenses. I'm actually a couple quarters behind on that, but it's on the parent company is called Civic Spark Media. So it's on the Civic Spark Media website. And so every quarter, my goal is to put those numbers out there, because I want other people who are working on this problem space of local news to either learn from what we're doing or to avoid, mistakes we've made. This fiscal year, we're probably on track to have about $500,000 in revenue. And again, about 43% of that will be from subscriptions and retail sales. Yeah, see how old that is? I really need to update that. So within that 43%, I looked, and about 85% is subscriptions and 15% retail sales. So that's the kind of subscriber reader side of things. Within that 57% of our revenue that's advertising, 70% is display ads, so just color or black and white ads that appear throughout the paper. About 13% is our legal advertising and public notices. About 4% is obituaries, 1.5% classifieds, and then about 1% online. So we've barely done anything with online advertising. There's also, we have a little kind of business card directory that's about 11% of our advertising income. And then, there's a few other things, design services, inscribing things, that kind of things. So I've been able to get to the point where, of that revenue, somewhere in the 10 to 15%, profit margin range. And really, I've been pouring that, back into raises and benefits and savings and infrastructure stuff, just trying to, build a foundation that will help us last for the long run. I don't have the full history of the profitability of the paper before me, but I have some sense that it was an up and down thing. Certainly with COVID, advertising was very limited for a while, but my staff seems, pleasantly surprised that not only are there no pay cuts, but there's some pay raises. There's some, benefits being added here and there, and that we can, buy lunch once in a while, and we can maybe get a new laptop once in a while, things like that. So I feel happy about those things. Again, very, very different than some of the spaciousness of finances that I experienced in the tech world, but I'll take it.
I'm curious what Dan thinks about that. At least my gut feeling is it's probably a little more money than I expected for a newspaper of that size.
That's impressive. Yeah, I think that's great. The one I was involved with at its founding that's still going is only a monthly paper in Milwaukee, and definitely there are ups and downs. It's cool. It's still going, but it was very much the baby of the publisher and a few other people that would come and go, and just very much a community institution connected with a few others. It's really interesting when the community holds it together, but small urban neighborhood with some reach. I don't know, maybe comparable numbers, but probably about half the circulation of what you're doing. That sounds great. Being in the black is better than the other.
But I should be clear again. I mean, it's only possible because I have a team who are willing to work for less than they could make elsewhere. They're willing to figure out, health insurance on the public marketplace because we can't offer it. And, they work hard because they care about it and would probably be doing some version of it even without pay. And that's, I don't take that for granted. I can't take it for granted. And in no way do I want to misrepresent that we're somehow a financial success story when we need to be paying people more and keep working toward that. But it's it's a balance, and I feel like we're on a good path.
Awesome. I'm just really impressed with the amount of information you've shared about it, from detailing your whole tech stack to those revenue numbers. You're doing a wonderful job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, like there's probably a whole other conversation to have about tech stack and, the ways in which, WordPress is a tool and Laravel is a tool, PHP, I mean, have enabled some amazing things for me and what we do. And I know between the three of us, a lot of experience, experimenting with building tools, plugins, SaaS products. And I think the newspaper world has a lot to learn from the SaaS and startup world and vice versa. And I guess that's, for me, I've just found this really amazing sweet spot of being able to experiment with those two worlds and bring them together. And I want to keep having conversations with people who are interested in that stuff. So it's really fun.
Congrats, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah. Congratulations. Great work. Yeah. I've always enjoyed your personal newsletter, but noticed that was very busy when you were new to this.
Yeah.
And then got quiet. I'm like, that's probably a good thing.
Basically all extra writing. And, if you ask my family, things around the house have been paused in the name of, trying to get things stabilized and shored up with the paper. And, I'm struggling to find that work-life balance because it is a labor of love. And, there's lots of things I'd like to be doing, like blogging, personal blogging and that kind of thing too. But, again, I'm grateful for the opportunity I have. It's just it's nonstop and it's pretty all consuming.
Yeah.
So I've got a final blog roll question for you. Is there a publisher, a group of people, or a single writer who is writing something really good you enjoy at the moment? Is there an outstanding publisher that you're enjoying and reading a lot at the moment?
And in particular around news and journalism, or just anything?
Just anything in general, really.
When I look at my RSS feed reader, if there's something from 404 Media lately, I've been clicking on that. I think they're doing a good job.
That's the second time in like 3 podcasts that someone's mentioned 404 Media.
And, there's a great podcast. I'm going to get the name wrong, but I think it's called It's All Journalism. And it's, he just interviews people who are in the world of journalism. And I tend to listen to those pretty quickly when they come out. Yeah, there's lots of, industry sites and newsletters and stuff that I read, and I'm often just skimming or picking out pieces that I can here and there. But I think On the Media, the podcast is one that's been really a consistent one for me. I think they've helped me understand the media world over the years in ways that I wouldn't otherwise. So that's another one that comes to mind too. But yeah, lots of podcasts, I guess, less reading. I get all my reading in every week when I'm editing articles for our paper. So yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. It's been wonderful to talk with you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all that each of you is doing in this world and others too.
Yeah, it's great to catch up. I've been curious for a while.